Welcome to another episode of Formula One Philosophy. Today's episode, we are far apart, but still together. What was it that they said during COVID back in the day? It was separate but together? That's what Sean and I are today. We are separate but together, recording Formula One Philosophy number 17. And today we're going to talk about the 2026 regulations that are coming into place in 2 years' time. At the end of it, we'll give our Spanish Grand Prix predictions, which the Spanish Grand Prix is in T-minus, I think, 36 hours from now. Friday night, June 21st, the summer solstice. It's a long-ass day today in Canada, in Ontario, where we're from. That cat will not shut up in the background if you guys are hearing. He's still better than producer Gatsby, who has decided he doesn't really want to work today. I imagine he, even though I'm not next to him, Sean, is licking the couch as we speak.
No, Gatsby's on my shit list this morning.
Oh, no.
Today. He did something this morning that got him in the doghouse, so to speak.
Oh, boy. What did he do? They poop on the stairs? He seems like a stair pooper.
No, nothing like that. He likes to charge everywhere he goes. And when you're 75 pounds of muscle and bone, not being able to stop that really hurts.
Oh. Yeah, he's just never going to figure out his strength, so to speak. I don't want to say the word I'm thinking here. He has a certain type of strength, shall we say?
Yeah, let's not use that.
Let's not use that word. Anyways, F1_philosophy at Instagram. Please like and follow us. F1philosophypod at gmail.com to join our fantasy league for the 2024 season. Producer Gatsby will not be able to set a team this weekend because he's in the doghouse. So he's going to take that out on us next week. Who knows what he'll do? He'll probably come up mid-recording and poop on the computer, I imagine. That's what he'll do out of anger. That's fine. Good luck, Gatsby.
I mean, if he does that, it might end up killing me, but...
I was going to say, maybe we'd have to get like a mob hit on producer Gatsby if he does that. But you think he's going to kill you first?
I think just the logistics of how I'm positioned with the computer on me, him pooping on the computer would involve a whole lot of trampling.
Ugh. Producer Gatsby, figuratively get your shit together. And not literally. And F1 Philosophy at YouTube. You guys have been loving our shorts. We're past 2,000 views, Sean. I don't know if you know. For some reason, our shorts are more popular than our long form. Please watch them.
Because
and
people don't want to hear your rant.
That just hurts, Sean. That hurts me in my head and my heart. That hurts.
I mean, somebody had to say it.
Ouch. I'm going to try not to rant today. I almost ranted now until you stopped that. But yeah, anyways, let's just get into it. The 2026 regs, I guess this were about, 2 weeks since they were announced? Around there?
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah, roughly. They came about, I think, to get everybody ready for what's going to happen. There's supposedly big changes coming. But if you look at it, it's mostly, I would say, in some of the aero and in the battery and the fact that they're using synthetic fuels. And I say that because they wanted to shorten the wheelbase and make it less wide, make the cars less boat-like. But all said and done, they only really thin the wheelbase 100 millimeters. Which is what, 10 centimeters?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, from what was it, 2,000 millimeters wide to 1,900. And the length was 3,800 millimeters to 36, I think, right? Something like that.
Something like that, yeah. It's a step. I don't know that it's enough of a step.
Yeah. I'm going to be spoiler in a lot of this conversation because I think somebody has to be. But I will say up front, I am somewhat happy with what I saw because, like you said, it's a step. It's the right step. And I'm going to say it's the step in the right direction. They need to start going more this way because I imagine next big regulations will come 5 years on from 2026, maybe even sooner, 2030. I think they said they want net zero, right? Or something like that. So I imagine that'll bring about new regulations then.
Yeah, there'll probably be some sort of change for 2030, but a large part of that net zero is the fuel. It'll be interesting to see how they justify them getting net zero.
Yeah, I think it's almost impossible, right? Like we're going to talk about the battery, but from what they've done in terms of research recently, in order to make these batteries, you actually end up expunging a lot of fossil fuels, from my understanding, which is with the material you need, the machinery you need. So yeah, you're maybe not.
That's not entirely true.
It's not. The point is, it's not zero.
Right, but that's why it's called net zero, right? The idea is that you're removing as much carbon from the atmosphere as you're putting out in the process. And the conversation about what it takes to get certain minerals out of the ground and how to process them, there's a lot of people, let's say, rallying about that without realizing that all the advances we're making in the technologies to do that, right? And that's part of their strategy. So the companies that are producing the biofuels, for example, they have to show that their fuel is produced in a sustainable way, in the sense that the energy that they use to power the facility, for example, has to be a renewable energy source. So if their facility, for example, is in a country that has something like 80% fossil fuel energy, they have to show that however they're producing that doesn't utilize fossil fuels to do that.
Oh, I see. So,
right? So there's a lot more to the conversation than that.
Okay, so I see. Like if because there's very few places in the world where you can get lithium, right? So what they're going to say is the company that's contracted to remove the lithium now has to use machinery powered by the same fuels, the same biofuels, essentially.
Not necessarily. They could be electric. They could be electric mining vehicles. They could be whatever. They could be even, for example, diesel. But if it's a diesel, you have to find a way to, let's say, sequester the carbon coming out of the exhaust, which is a technology that exists.
Kind of like.
So you might be burning the.
Sorry, go.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So you might be burning a fossil fuel to power that equipment, but if you have systems on those machines that sequester the carbon, so as it's burnt and it releases carbon, it actually collects that. And then that is actually part of the sustainability of it, because these biofuels, part of one of the ways, let's say, that you can make these biofuels or these sustainable fuels is to take sequestered carbon and use that as the input to create the energy in the fuel. So you're essentially recycling carbon.
Is it similar to something like how they turn the coal into water vapor in parts of Pennsylvania and Virginia? Something like that?
No, that's just burning coal.
Okay. Before, yeah, but go on.
So think about it this way. When you burn fuel, there is a carbon byproduct that comes out of the exhaust or comes out as exhaust. So gas that comes out of your exhaust pipe is a mixture of different chemicals, and some of those are hydrocarbons. It's the hydrocarbons that are the concern and what we want to get rid of. So ideally, we wouldn't create them. So a lot of the emissions regulations that are out there focus on limiting the percentage of hydrocarbons. But if they're going to come out, is there a way that we can capture them before they get into the atmosphere?
Yeah, it's a big ask.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's. But you're saying there is some technology to do it because it is a big ask. But there is some technology.
There is technology to do it, yes.
Okay.
The question that then becomes similar to the nuclear question: what do you do with it? Okay, you've captured the carbon, but that carbon can't be destroyed. It can be reused, or it can be put into the atmosphere, or it can be stored somewhere in, forever, essentially. So that's where the sustainable fuels come in, because if you can capture that carbon and then use it to make the sustainable fuel, that fuel is now a recycled product.
Okay. So,
right? So you're not creating new carbon. You're using, let's say, old carbon or used carbon, which then goes into a car and gets burnt and creates carbon anyway. But that's the other side of the equation.
So there's still some emissions then, is what you're saying, because like even if it's reused, there's still going to be eventually be an emission.
Yes, when the F1 car burns the fuel, it will create a hydrocarbon emission. But that's again where the net zero comes in. So effectively, whatever they're burning in the vehicles at each race, whatever the transportation vehicles and airlines and all that use to support F1 is offset by the amount of carbon they save everywhere else in the process.
Okay. It's ambitious.
So that's why I say it is ambitious, yes. And that's why I say it'll be interesting to see how they justify the net zero portion of it, how they get to that zero, because it's a huge amount of carbon and energy that's being used for this series.
They'll do what all major like government or corporate bodies do, is that they'll underwrite something, they'll justify something else and pat themselves on the back and tell you how great they are. And I don't want to get into the weeds with that. I just like, I'm not optimistic that they'll do the right thing, is all I'm going to say.
I think they'll get to a point where they're very close, let's say. It's similar to the cost cap, right? Cost cap is $140 million, but it excludes X, Y, and Z.
Driver salaries,
So,
yeah.
Driver salaries, I think the top 3 highest salaries in the team get excluded. And certain capital expenditure.
Transportation?
Right.
Probably.
Nope. Transportation's included.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Even catering.
Yeah.
That's the thing that caught Red Bull out, allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. Yeah. We'll never actually know what happened there.
Well, it was Nui's salary. It was. It's not a joke. It's
No, I know.
They understood that things like catering weren't included, and then they excluded Nui's salary because it was one of the larger ones. But he's not an employee, he's a contractor, so that was one of the technicalities that they've tried to work around, and it bit them in the ass.
I'm just laughing because it didn't matter what they paid him, didn't matter what they tried to do, they still lost him. That's why I was chuckling. But yeah, so
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah. And I bring it up just to say, net zero, I think we should be going there. That is what we should be aiming for. But like everything else, I have my doubts that they will truly hit net zero with these by 2030.
yeah. It was an ambitious early target. This stuff like this is going to take time. I've even heard like the discussion about nuclear being like you brought up nuclear, like something like that being non-wasteful, non-radioactive. Like they have processes that they're trying to develop now. I think thorium is one of them, but that's still 50 years away and stuff like that. Nuclear can,
Yeah, and
sorry.
yeah, it's the exact same thing, right? So they're trying to recycle certain materials. They're trying to make smaller units that use old fuel. You know, everybody's trying to get to the same thing: is how do we recycle as much as we can? How do we minimize usage? How do we, you know, create new technologies? So it's if you don't set a target, you never have the urgency to push to it.
Yeah.
So I think 2030 is what they need to aim for, and inevitably they won't hit it, but at least they're getting there.
Yeah. And I guess if a lot of this is interim, because I think ultimately nuclear can, if it's safe and non-radioactive and not something where you have to dispose into the ocean, is the real solution long term in terms of powering everybody's needs without having to reduce living standards. But like we have to, if this is a good interim solution, which is battery and biofuel or whatever, like hybrids, it's a good interim step while we get to the point where we can grow our needs while not emitting as much. Anyway, sorry, do you want to add anything before we move on?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. So yeah, we talked about the smaller wheelbase. We haven't mentioned the 30 kilogram weight reduction, because with that also comes, and I think you should explain this to everybody. How does a weight reduction correlate to the 30% reduction in downforce? Or does it not correlate? But it just seems like whenever anybody brings up the weight reduction, they say, oh, well, it's also going to coincide with a 30% reduction in downforce.
There might be an issue with interpretation there.
Okay.
It's not 30% weight reduction.
30
That
kilograms,
would
sorry.
be massive.
30 kilograms,
yeah.
yes.
30 kilogram weight reduction is what they're focusing on by shortening the wheelbase, shortening the track of the car, reducing the amount of downforce is separate from the weight, but less downforce allows you to get less weight. I think that's what you're going for.
Okay. Yeah, because like I can only interpret this so well. I have no fundamental understanding. It's just like I said, they always seem to mention the two hand in hand. And now I think you explained it really well. Okay, go on.
So what they're saying effectively is we've done X, Y, and Z to make the car smaller, which will get weight out of it. But then they pretty much automatically counter that by increasing the mass of the powertrain. The battery is going to be, I think, almost double what it is today, which the batteries are going to be heavier than 30 kilos extra. So everything you've taken out of the car from track and wheelbase, and that is going to counteract what you lose from the new batteries. But taking downforce out of the car takes a lot of aerodynamic load off of the components. So you have to think that when you're driving at 300 plus kilometers an hour and you're generating X amount of points of downforce, think of it like an actual weight being applied to the car. Right? So they're generating, I don't know what it is, but hundreds of kilograms of downforce on these cars. So that's hundreds of kilograms of weight being added to this car. When you design the structure of that car, you have to account for that aerodynamic load as well as the physical load of the car. Are you still with me?
No. I'm trying to get my head around this because I'm trying to use my own analogy. So the downforce keeps the car from flying, essentially, because it's going so fast that...
Oh, forget about what the downforce does. All right, let's look at this as a statics problem. The car weighs what it weighs, 1,800 kilos or something like that. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So sitting still, it weighs 1,800 kilos. I have to make a car that holds 1,800 kilos. This is Newton's laws. That all the structure that connects all those components to the ground and makes it stay where it is need to support the weight pushing down on it, right? So every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So the car has to be structurally sound to hold that 1,800 kilos. If we had zero downforce, all it would need to do is support its own weight. But we don't have zero downforce. We have hundreds of kilograms of extra downforce. So if you didn't account for the extra load on the car from the downforce, the suspension would basically just give out as soon as you got to a certain load point that it couldn't withstand anymore. Right? So,
go on.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, so speed adds, at a certain speed, the car's feeling more forces against it, and that's why the suspension would give out?
Yes.
Okay.
So drag squares with speed, and drag is not necessarily downforce, but it goes hand in hand. So as you go faster and faster, you generate more drag, you generate more downforce on the car. Right? An efficient aerodynamic package is one that converts the added drag into downforce. A non-efficient aero package converts the drag into nothing, let's say, other than drag, other than a force pulling the car back or stopping it from moving forward faster. So when it creates downforce, as the car goes through the air faster and faster and faster, each kilometer added is squared in drag.
Okay. And right. So this, I'm just trying to relate this to the regulations and things everybody have been talking about. So 30%. Yeah. Go on.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to ask, 30% less downforce is with what they're estimating is higher speeds, higher drag. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So just on the topic of weight and aerodynamics. So they're saying they're going to have 30% less downforce. What that means is 30% less additional load added to the car. So when you take into account the amount of downforce pushing on the car, it's going to be 30% less. So you can take 30% out of your load calculation and make things like your body panels, your crash structure, your suspension lighter, because it doesn't need to be as beefy because you've taken 30% out.
Okay, but this is where so that's a great point. That did actually bring a light bulb in my head in a sense. But that downforce also means you have less grip in the corners, right?
But
That
that's
less.
where the X and Y arrow comes in.
Okay, so that's what we'll get to now, which this does seem exciting. The X arrow is acting as the new DRS essentially. And this is according to
On
what
the
I gather.
straights. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Z arrow helps increase the downforce, which we're losing just at certain points though. And they're very ambitious with this. They're also saying less dirty air is going to be coming out from the Z arrow, which will help cars get a better slipstream. It'll make for better racing, more passing, more natural passing, I'm thinking is what they're going for. But do you want to explain to everybody the X arrow and the Z arrow as you gathered it?
So the X arrow, they haven't been very clear on exactly what's going to change or how it's going to do this. But like you said, the X arrow is going to be the new DRS. So on the straights, they will be able to control how the front and rear wing move to reduce the amount of drag. Right, so DRS now, all it does is it moves that upper wing flap, opens a slot in the rear wing, and eliminates the effect of that wing plane, basically. Lowers the profile of it, you get less drag, you can have a higher top speed. That's what they're going to do with the front and rear wing. To some extent, those flaps will move to reduce the aerodynamic effect, allowing them to go faster on the straights. The other interesting point to that is it will be all of the straights. And it will not matter how close or how far you are from the car in front of you.
So it's no longer zones. It's now the driver's discretion to choose when they want to use the X arrow.
Yes. And the Z arrow will basically be adding downforce, I believe, as a scalable factor around the corners. So the easiest thing I can think of to show this is if you're familiar with some of the newer hypercars like the McLaren P1, the LaFerrari, all the other big ones basically. When they're going at high speed, they usually have a wing that pops up, and that wing kind of moves around to give them a stable aero platform through the corners. It's effectively that.
And is that, but once again, it's front and back wing for the Z arrow, or is it just back wing? Is it just front wing?
My understanding is both are the entire aero package. So the wings are the movable components, and in both X and Y, it will adjust front and rear
as needed, essentially, as needed when at the driver's discretion.
Yeah, and I think the driver will be able to activate it, and I believe it has to be set up by the team. So they'll have the ability to set it up on a per track basis effectively, and the driver has the ability to activate it as needed.
That's interesting. Can a driver now, I guess we won't know, for a couple of years now, can a driver mod his car, so to speak, or adjust his car, so to speak, to have these in a certain way to benefit their driving ability, or is it going to be one size fits all type of X and Z arrows?
No, my understanding is it will be freely adjustable.
Very interesting.
So just like today, front wings are freely adjustable. You'll see it when they go in, during practice, they'll add turns to the front wing if they want more or less front end. And even in the races, when they change tires, they'll also change the angle of the front wing based on what they found in practice, right? So a soft tire that will warm up quicker might need less front wing than the hard tire that is going to take longer to warm up. So they crank on more front wing to put more load into the front tires to help them heat up faster, right? They have that adjustability now, but it's at a pit stop. Whereas with the X and Y aero, it will effectively be able to do that at each corner and straight as it's set up per driver per track.
Wow. That I could not gather from what I read. So that's a bombshell to me. That I like. Now drivers have the ability to, or I guess two different aspects that they now have to make their own in their car. And yeah, I imagine it's going to be somewhat straightforward, but still, like you said, there is some minor adjustments that can be made. Each race, each turn, each sector. That's exciting to me.
Yeah, it is. And it's really going to start showing us which drivers truly understand the impact of aero on the car and which team's engineers truly understand what the soul of the regulation is. Let's say it that way. Right? Like, you can design an F1 car to the regulation set and have it give you decent downforce. You won't necessarily have a competitive car per se, but you'll have a car that generates enough downforce to go racing. This new set of regulations, you can do just that, but you're definitely not going to be competitive if you have no idea how to properly set up these new systems to actively be manipulated around each track, right? So there's a driver standpoint because they still have to provide feedback. And if the active aero situation is incomprehensible to them, they won't be able to provide relevant feedback to the engineers. But at the same time, if the engineers aren't competent enough to understand how these complex systems work, we're going to see potentially more catastrophes like we've seen with Mercedes in the last few years, right? They go completely the wrong direction on it.
Yeah, but it also sounds like they have the ability to fix it faster now. Potentially, if they understand what's going on. Or if they can...
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah. So it's not Mercedes now having to redevelop for the last 3 seasons. It's maybe 3 races. Let's hope, at least.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, again, a new regulation set, you can get it pretty drastically wrong.
Yeah. Well, you made a point about, okay, which engineers seem to understand things. So I think it's going to be pretty obvious that Ferrari's going to miss the mark, Sauber's going to miss the mark, and Aston Martin's going to miss the mark. Because based on
Sauber's got Audi.
Well, like you said in the past, Audi doesn't seem to give a shit anymore. Realistically, the guy who brought it in doesn't care, or he left. Sorry, and nobody else seemed to care.
I mean, that's what a lot of people have been throwing out. They wouldn't be around if they didn't care. It's too much money just to spend for no good reason. So they have a team of people working on it, and there does seem to be horsepower behind it. But anyway, that's not the point. We're not here to talk about Audi at the moment.
Yeah.
But I mean, for all we know, a newless Red Bull might get it completely wrong.
Yeah, that's a good point. But they do have someone who seems to understand what he wants in a car in Max Verstappen. So that I think...
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at this weekend, they can't give it to him.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that in a bit. I missed practice, so I thought he did pretty good in FP1, but yeah, we'll see. Um, what else do I want to talk about here?
Um, and I can elaborate more on the outwash or the dirty air, let's say.
Okay.
So I assume you've seen the pictures of the car.
Yes.
I personally think they don't look too good. I hope somebody comes up with a nicer looking version of that. Part of my gripe is that front wing. So they've narrowed the front wing to the point where it's basically on the inside of the front tires, but they've left the bottom plane extended. So the lower portion of the wing goes to the outside of the tires, and then the end fences of the front wing are basically on the inside of the front tires.
The flaps you're talking about, like, or yeah, I know what you're talking
The vertical bits
about.
that
Yes.
cap the wing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the fact that there's a lower plane that extends past those to the outside of the wheel looks a little goofy to me. But that's effectively guiding air to the front tire. And then what ends up happening is, it's a ridiculous term, but it's called aero squish. So the tire, air runs under the tire and it gets squished under the tire and shot out the sides, basically. And it seems like a trivial thing, but it does impact the car. And up until this latest generation, every team basically focused on how do I get that aero squirt or aero squish away from my aerodynamics, which is to push it outside the envelope of the car, right? So that's what a lot of the barge boards that you used to see, a lot of the complex barge boards behind the front tires, was basically to take all that awkward air coming out from around the tire and direct it away from the car. The new regulations, they basically said, well, we're not going to let you do that anymore. So this is what you have to have: these over wheel arches. You have to have a front wing that goes to this position and does this. And the flap geometry has to be a certain way to funnel all that air under the car. And that's what they were trying to do to clean up the dirty air, funnel it under the car. The floor, the diffuser under the car, cleans up all that air. And when it exits the back of the car, it's not as disrupted as it used to be. So that has worked, but teams are now finding ways around it. They're finding ways to generate vortices and all sorts of movement of air back outside of the envelope of the car, which is not what the FIA wants, because that generates more dirty air and makes overtaking more difficult. So that front wing that they've developed and the, let's say, floor inlets that are now prescribed are all there to basically take all that dirty air around the tire and funnel it under the car. And there will be, at least as far as the FIA is concerned, there will be no way to get around that. That is all prescribed geometry, very strictly controlled, to make sure that teams cannot exploit certain aerodynamic principles that would create dirty air.
Yeah, as a team, it's imperative that you want the opposing teams to have as little, what's the word, edge in passing you. I get why they would want to create more dirty air. Obviously, I guess the FIA has has officially shut that door now.
And if you, yes, or at least tried to. And that's just it. If you can get the dirty air away from your car, you're going to have a more stable platform. And it also has the added benefit to you of disadvantaging the guy behind you.
Mm-hmm. So it's more just personal preference and aesthetic, though. Do you like the idea that there's less dirty air? because it also brings about. We can talk about too how there's now essentially they're creating new racing lines with this whole new aerodynamic package. Whereas now you had to all stick to one line because the cars were so stiff. And like you said, there's more dirty air being pressed against you. So it's everybody's taking the same line, everybody having a hard time to pass. And the way around it was DRS in certain zones, which in 90% of the tracks are untouchable. Like the DRS is just like this giant falcon punch, so to speak, to bring out a Super Smash Bros. Reference, that's untouchable. You can't stop it. So now, even though you may not like the front wing the way it looks, they've created an area, like a platform, that drivers can now take many different lines without having to worry about dirty air, and they have also the ability to maneuver the car better, attack the corners differently, attack the inside corner, the outside corner. Do you want to speak to that?
Yes. Yeah, and it should do exactly that, right? As they've written it and as they're hyping it up, that's what they're going for. They want it to be exciting. They want it to give drivers more control. It gets the suspension back to being a little softer, so you don't have the issue of bouncing or porpoising anymore. We should see that go away. Where I start to have a problem with it is if it's prescribed geometry, that means it cannot change. Teams aren't allowed to do anything to it, which then gets to the point of, well, why not have a spec series then? And yeah, okay, the rest of the geometry of the car, they can adjust, there is still some freedom in it. But if we're going to start prescribing aero geometry so strictly that it just cannot be touched from what the FIA says the design is, that's where it starts to bother me a bit.
Well, that ship sailed. We've been sailing on this path in the ocean, so to speak, for 15 years, since the 2009 regulations.
We haven't. But
okay, but I could extrapolate then that when you make big changes and when you give power to one governing body and not necessarily the teams, the engineers, and it's just, okay, this is what we want, this is what we're going for, this is the platform for it. Yeah, technically there hasn't been a full-scale set geometry until now, but that was always coming. Like, it's too late now, I would say. Like, it's too late to complain about this now. It's like for the same reason that everybody said, oh, another street circuit? It's like, yeah, well, where were you when they made big changes to the car to make it more street circuit friendly 15 years ago? And that's all I'm going to say. We can't sit here and say, oh, no, it might be a spec series now. It's been trending in that direction for 15 years. My opinion. This is completely my
opinion on it. So, from a regulation standpoint, and if you can get the technical regulations, you can look at them yourself. They're on the FIA website. You don't need any sort of credentials to be able to pull them up. Effectively, what they tell you is this is the dimension the car needs to be. In this area, 300 millimeters behind the front axle, you have a zone of X millimeters by Y millimeters that has to be free from obstructions without holes in the floor or something like that, right? It doesn't tell you a specific geometry of the body panels per se. It may tell you what the opening of the floor needs to be. The opening of the floor needs to be 600 millimeters by 300 millimeters. That's not what it is, but that's just the number that came to my head, right? But that doesn't dictate any of the actual aero performance behind that, right? And we saw that when we got looks at the floor of the Red Bull car versus the Williams car, right? We saw a Williams car which basically had no definition on the floor versus a Red Bull car which had all sorts of crazy shit on it. So you can say they've been trending for 15 years into a spec series, but it's clear that the regulations are written in such a way where interpretation and engineering knowledge can get you somewhere, and they're not all the same.
Yeah,
To
but
the
let's go on.
uneducated, let's say, they look similar. But when you spend enough time looking at these cars, we have 10 very different looking cars on the grid, right? And I get what you're saying about, yeah, we've gone to certain things that makes it inevitable that we're going to get to a spec series, sure.
The one
But it
tire
doesn't
manufacturer.
have to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, whatever.
Yeah, the one tire manufacturer, the new types of like output, like I know the MGU and the MGUK are up for interpretation, but still it's everybody put that in at a certain point, but Toyota wasn't allowed that in 2004. You know what I mean? So once it got to the point where it said, okay, now everybody's doing it, it was okay. But when other teams wanted to test it, like Toyota, no. So there was less freedom. Like that's what I'm saying. If you look at it from this wide angle lens that I do, they've been trending towards one specific set of guidelines for a long time. Because if they didn't, they would still have different tire manufacturers. They wouldn't have as much stringent regulations. We talked about last episode too. They got to a point where they even said, okay, you can't talk to your engineer, which we both agreed was complete nonsense. But it's stuff like that where you keep seeing it over and over again. Like, let's tinker with this. Let's tinker with that. Let's tinker with this. It eventually gets to the point, and I think a great analogy is like governing bodies or corporations will make the wrong decisions over and over and over again until they are either forced to make one sweeping decision or give up completely. And they won't give up. I do you understand what I'm trying to say? I know I'm sort of giving some verbal diarrhea here, but I'm just trying to say they will always make the consistent wrong decision until they have to make one big decision. We have to keep taking away more and more freedom for this, freedom for that. Okay, now we're a totalitarian state. So I know I'm ranting now, and we'll get back on topic. But that's how I see it. It's how I've seen the last 20 years of Formula One. Let's just keep going in this direction, and then eventually we'll have to be a spec series.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And you can say that all you want, but that's if you want a sporting series where anybody has any hope in having competition, there has to be some limitation on it.
I think we'll always agree to disagree with that. If you ever hear my therapy number 9, I made my rebuttal against that.
Yeah, so we'll let Red Bull just put a fucking rocket engine in the back of their car while Williams is out there with a Volkswagen Beetle engine.
That won't necessarily be the case if there's no, like, once again, if there's no cost cap. Williams can make an investment in their infrastructure. They can make an investment, like Vowles has been talking about. He hasn't been able to update his infrastructure because of the cost cap. There's little things like that.
Well, no, but then you get into this shit show of which billionaire wants to piss more money away on it.
Oh, you can't say that when there's Lawrence Stroll, when there's Red Bull. Like before there was Jordan F1, there was Forti F1, there was Minardi, there was Tyrrell, Babram. There was all these small companies. Now we have 10 billionaires. Gene Haas, Lawrence Stroll. We have Red Bull, which was never competitive until the regulations got more stringent for them to have more infrastructure and more infrastructure spending than close the door on everybody else. I disagree with that thoroughly.
But now we have a cost cap, right? So Lawrence Stroll has billions of dollars to spend on this, but he can't. And it shows. Because he can't throw billions of dollars at the series, and look where they are.
But he's also the only one who can buy it. He's also the only one who can buy the team, who can keep the team afloat. For him, I get to put it. For him, Lawrence Stroll, I get to only spend 140 million, and I get back $1 billion in revenue from the F1, from F1.com or F1 Formula One, FIA. That's a shrewd investment for him.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with their performance, right? The idea is that it doesn't matter how big their pockets are, it can't justify or it can't skew the performance towards them just because they have bigger pockets, right? Whereas if you get away from the cost cap and any sort of regulation, then Red Bull will truly give themselves wings and literally fly away, right? It's at that point, without regulation, without any sort of control over what's happening, that's what you get. You get teams like Williams and Sauber and all these other little guys that will simply disappear because they can't keep up. And then you get billionaires basically trying to go to space.
But
So,
that doesn't mean there can't be like a set of rules. Because see, that's very hyperbolic. It's like saying, okay, if we let
now we're coming back around to it. Right?
No, but like I
there
think
needs to be a set of rules,
but not too stringent. Just a template. Like before, Formula One used to be okay. How's the fastest you can get this car around the track? But I don't think I think they still had an understanding. We can't just create airplanes. Does that make sense? Okay. I think both of us have a rant in our head, and we're missing a big point, myself included. Like I'm not taking a swipe at you there. We both have a big rant in our head as what we see, and we're interpreting these new rules in our own way. But let's come together like the Beatles song. But I'll let you add one more point because I did ramble on for a bit.
No, and it's fine. And I actually think you and I are coming to a convergence on what we're saying. You and I may differ on, let's say, where they finally end up. My point is, if these are prescribed geometries that cannot be touched and there is no gray area and no room for interpretation, it has now gone too far and it needs to stop. And I hear you, and your opinion is, well, it was inevitable. No, bullshit. We can always put a stop to it. So that's kind of where I was going with that. But anyway, that's actually not the part of these regulations that worry me.
Yeah, I think we're getting close to an hour now. I'll let you start. Let's both give our worries of these regulations. Where do you think they might go wrong with this?
So the DRS is gone. It's been replaced by that X arrow, which is great. But that's not the end of it. There is still going to be an overtaking aid. You will get extra battery deployment if you're within 1 second of the car in front of you on certain straights. So very much like a DRS type system, but with battery deployment. And the driver is the sole control of that system, which is not bad in itself. To me, it sounds too much like these push-to-pass systems that you see in Formula E and Indy and whatever else.
Yeah.
Which I think in those cases, they've made them gimmicks more than anything useful. Super Formula has something similar, which works really well. The part of it that concerns me is my understanding as it's written today, the leading driver will effectively get a performance penalty for being in the lead. So on straights at full deployment, the leading driver will have their deployment reduced by a certain percentage. So once they hit a certain speed, I believe, their deployment is cut and will effectively maintain that speed.
Sorry,
That's the part.
just a question: is that limited by the FIA, or just is it because you need to be behind a car to get the maximum benefit?
No, that is limited by the FIA, and it is in the rule set. And if you remember a little while ago, there was some chatter about these regulations won't work, the engine specifications aren't, doing what they're supposed to do. They're going to be running as generators more than they're going to be generating driving power, for example. There's a whole bunch of talk about that, and the FIA's response to that is, yes, with less downforce, you're going to get higher speeds, and those higher speeds then drive powertrain concerns. And this is effectively their way around it. So the person in the lead can't exceed certain speeds, and when they get to a defined speed, their battery deployment will effectively drop. Which to me sounds like a handicap, like you're applying a handicap to the guy in the lead, which, okay, I can see the arguments for it, but it doesn't feel like that's in the nature of F1.
No, because my first thought is, okay, what's the point of pit stop strategies? What's the point of having a 30, like being in the lead, getting to a certain point, not having to worry about taking a pit stop if you're going to be slower by, let's just say, 0.2 a lap once you get into the lead? It's probably not that much, and maybe it is, maybe it's more, I hope not. But like, you can't develop that gap in a race. You can also say someone...
Sure you can.
But if second place is...
You absolutely can.
But if, let's say second place, but like it says, it sounds like this to me, like first place gets to a point, and then second place has 10 kilometers an hour more at all times to catch up. Or maybe I'm just hearing that. It's just, okay, so it's not that they have any more, that first has less.
Again, it is like a DRS. The rules around it are very much structured like the DRS is. On straights, and I can't remember if it's on every straight or on defined straights, if you're within 1 second of the car in front of you, you will get extra battery deployment. Right? So, yes, the guy in first might get penalized by getting less battery deployment. But if he's 2 seconds ahead, the guy behind him doesn't get that advantage.
Oh, I see. I see. So
you can still absolutely pull out the gap.
You still need to be close. Second still needs to be close to first.
Yes.
Okay.
And they're hoping that all the other changes will make sure that we get very close gaps. My problem with it is, why are you penalizing the guy in front?
Yeah. But that X arrow and Z arrow is only for when you're getting close to other cars, then. It's not at all times.
No, the X arrow and the Z arrow are completely separate from this.
Okay, so yeah,
the new DRS, let's call it DRS, but it's not DRS. The new DRS system is a battery boost.
Okay. Now I get it now. So drivers can still figure out their arrow, but now you'll just, okay, I get it. Now the battery becomes that DRS. Okay, but I finally figured it out. Took me a sec. We're not dealing with a full hand here, people. Okay, when it comes to my understanding of Formula One regulations. But yeah, do you want to go on?
Yeah. No, that's it for me.
My biggest worry is that all the drivers are complaining about it. And they're saying it seems slow. And as I think you've all gathered from this talk, the FIA, to me, is guilty until proven innocent. They can sit here and give out goals and benchmarks all they want, they've missed the mark in every one of the last 4 regulation changes in terms of what they wanted. Now,
how did they miss the mark on this one?
we wanted say 2009, they wanted closer, more balanced racing, more teams fighting.
Forget about 2009.
Okay, you just want to talk about this one?
Regulations.
I know. I can't say whether they missed the mark or not yet. In 2022, they wanted closer racing, more competitive championships, and then they got just one team that ran away with it for 3 years. And that's what I mean.
Yeah, but you're missing the rest of the field. I mean, look at this year. Qualifying, we're talking about 1st to 20th within less than 2 seconds of each other. This is the closest it's ever been.
And still one team is running away with it.
Not anymore.
Yeah, it took 3 years, and that's what I was about to add, is that thanks to the engineers at other teams, they made up for that gap. But like the first year of every regulation change, there always seems to be one team that just runs away with it.
Sure.
Yeah, and
it's the team that got it right.
Yeah, but that didn't used to happen, did it?
It absolutely did. Look at 98.
That wasn't a full-fledged regulation change. That was natural progression come 98. 98, McLaren figured out something. The year before, they were useless.
Sure. The point is, whether it's a regulation change or a team finding something, which frankly is all a regulation change is, the team that runs away with it on a regulation change year is the one that found something the other guys didn't. It's the same problem.
Okay.
You have engineers who look at these things and try and find it, right? So inevitably, whoever's been looking at it the longest and with the most attention to detail is probably going to be the one that comes out on top. And if you want something, a regulation change where you do have close racing, then you're into a spec series.
That's a good point. I'll give you that. So naturally, I think what you're saying is there has to be a natural big winner in order for them to move on at a certain point. Like once you start the new regulations, someone has to be a big winner in order for others to catch up and become competitive. That convergence needs to happen over time.
Yes.
Okay.
If you don't end up converging, or if somebody doesn't find something different, then there's no flexibility, or nobody's actually thinking. All right, this is that, and I'll make the analogy of if everybody is thinking the same way, then nobody's thinking.
Yes. That's a good point. Right? Yeah, so I guess I'm still arguing for let's never have changed it in the first place. And I need, like I've said before on this show, I probably need to stop that. But I can't help it sometimes. Do you hold any credence to Max, Carlos, and Lewis? And Lewis said the best line of all time. To them saying that the cars look slow? Because from my understanding, from what they said, the cars are really fast on the straights, but they can't corner as well. And so it's led to a slower type of car. And Lewis said the great line, all the people who have done the simulator have given that similar thought, which is to say he's still not doing any work. He's just going off of somebody else's work, which is really funny to me.
Yeah. So here's the fun part. Nobody's driven that car because nobody's had a chance to drive it or to design it. They can't start working on that car until later this year, or actually into next year, I believe it is. So nobody has a usable model for the sim that makes any sense. All the models that exist are FIA-based models, and they're not necessarily designed to be competitive versions of that car. That design, that model that's out there is the FIA baseline for it. So sure, whatever prescribed geometry that the FIA has is going to be carried over. But the rest of that car, nobody's gone through and tried to pick apart and figure out how they're going to do different things. So whoever has driven anything simulator related on that model, it's not a proper F1 racing car until the teams get it and do their thing.
And that
Right?
that won't be allowed
drivers,
until when? Bahrain preseason testing, essentially. They'll know for sure in 26.
they'll have some simulator data in 25, late 25. But yeah, effectively until almost preseason testing, no one will have any idea what that car feels like. Because there's a saying in Six Sigma, all models are useless, some models are helpful. And that's effectively what we have. We have a model, a mathematical model, based on what people assume they're going to get. Right? These cars that we're using today, the sim models are very accurate because we've done so much testing over the last 3 years. You know, we've done less testing than we have 10, 20 years ago, but we run at Bahrain, we run at Barcelona, however many times. We collect all this data. We collect all this data in free practice to plug back into these simulator models to make the models better, to make the feedback to the drivers in the simulators better, to the point where, yeah, the simulator probably feels very much like the actual car. But without having a physical car to do that, you're hoping your calculations are right. You're hoping your models that you've created based on those calculations are accurate. But you won't know if it works until you get physical hardware and hit the track with it. So it may look slow. I don't know what the fuck that means. How do you know if something's slow just by its look?
Yeah, so I guess I used the wrong word. Like, Max and Carlos and Lewis were saying, based on what we tested, the cars are slow. Like, there's slower lap times, like we're getting in the simulator. But you bring up a great point. You're not going to get real feedback until 26. Like, you may find something in that time. Yeah. I had a feeling you would say exactly this when Max complained, because Max, we've talked about before, has aversion to change. What worried me is someone who doesn't normally complain, which is Carlos. And like I said, my instinct is to say the FIA is guilty until proven innocent. But
sure.
Yeah. So that's where my worries came from. But you did a good job to quell some of them. And I appreciate that.
And I want to, there's a podcast, I believe it's Beyond the Grid, with Nicholas Tombassis, I believe his name is, who is the engineer who's in charge of these regulations. He's FIA's head of single-seater racing. He's an aerodynamicist by training, and he worked at Benetton and Ferrari during the Schumacher days. Right, so he's part of that team that's responsible for Schumacher's winning cars. And his comment is effectively, it's easy to make a car go fast. If we wanted the cars to be the fastest things out there, and we wanted to reduce lap times by 25 seconds, we could absolutely do it. That's not the point. Right? Having a fast car around these tracks isn't necessarily the best thing for the sport.
Williams. You know, I'm just saying the analogy is Williams. Williams always seems to have the most top speed, but it means fuck all. You know what I mean? Like, it's the whole package, I think, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, it's about the racing. right? Because you can have extremely fast cars, but if they can't get close to each other, what's the point? Right? Look at 2016 through 18, basically. With Mercedes running away with it, nobody else was anywhere near them. Okay, back into the grid, it got a little interesting from time to time. But largely, it was once whatever car got out in front, which always ended up being a Mercedes, they were gone. No one can get close to them. Now, that's not really the case. And you can argue that earlier in the regulations it was the case with Max, but as we've discussed before, Max isn't human, so it doesn't really count.
He'll bring an advantage to Red Bull, like I said earlier. Like, no matter what they could fuck up, he'll still bring an advantage in some ways. They may not come out flying like they did this time, but he'll still keep them in the discussion.
Yeah.
Before we give our Spanish Grand Prix predictions, is there anything else you want to talk about?
No. I think we'll see what happens in 26.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Right, we're just now like we can sit here and we can speculate, and like you're saying, hypothetically this seems like it can be really interesting. Hypothetically, it seems like there's some issues they have to iron out, but we won't know for 2 years. I'm kind of optimistic. Which is the first time I've seen a regulation set and been optimistic. I just worry. I always do. I always worry that a body like a corporate body or a governing body, I'll always worry that they can sit here and tell you all the propaganda they want, but they can really easily miss the mark. And I don't know. I'm going to try. You brought up a good point earlier too. I need to be more hopeful instead of hopeless. Let's bring a positive spin to these regulations from this point forward. Let's not just be not destitute. Like, let's not be all is lost at all times. Thank you for saying that. Like, you're right, because we can always go backwards. We can always fix things. It's a hopeless attitude to think you can never fix it. It's too late.
Exactly. And you brought up the example of banning radio chatter between driver and engineer. That's an example of going backwards. They changed that pretty quickly, and that was in the Ecclestone era. So even a stubborn jackass like Bernie Ecclestone could realize that they fucked it up and needed to go backwards, right? So I think we're getting to that point where I have my concerns with one or two pieces of that regulation. The rest of it I think is great. But I think even those areas that I'm concerned with, other people are probably already talking about that and trying to figure out how to make it better. So I think there is a lot to be hopeful for.
I'm going to agree with you there. The X era and the Z era alone, it brings out a whole set of possibilities that are going to be really cool. Like I think you said it earlier perfectly. We're going to see who the real driver and engineers are. And I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Barcelona. That's not how you say it. It can't be how you properly say it, right? I'm just being a dick. It's not Barcelona, is it?
No, it is not.
Okay, good. I like this course. I like the outline. I like it. There's some high-speed parts. There's some high-speed corners. There's some low-speed corners. Usually makes for a good, interesting race, especially when there's crappy weather like we saw in 96. Do you have any thoughts on what's coming this weekend? You mentioned something about practice. What's going on in practice?
I mean, it's more of the same that we've seen this year, where Max can't get it together on Fridays. My comment, though, comes specifically from something he said on the radio today, which goes back to what you and I have said about what Max likes in a car, right? That very pointy, aggressive front end. And his comment on the radio, and his times weren't terrible. Like, he wasn't down at the bottom of the field, but he wasn't comfortable. And specifically what he was saying is there's so much understeer mid-corner, the car just doesn't want to bite.
Ooh.
It got me thinking. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say that's his whole advantage. Yeah. Go on.
Yeah. So in FP1, we had Verstappen in P2 and Sergio in P5, which, let's say, is underperforming for Sergio if your assumption is he's going to be number 2 to Max every weekend. But I think we're getting to the point in the season where we can confidently say that Max isn't a guaranteed win anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We had a very dominant Lando out there who looked very good, and the Mercedes looked good as well. So FP2, we ended up with Verstappen P5 and Perez P13. So that gap came back, let's say. But Max didn't seem as annoyed in FP2. So it's got me thinking, is the team looking at ways that they can make Perez more comfortable, which would then inherently make Verstappen less comfortable?
Oh, that's a good point. In order to balance the team to get the constructors solidified, they have to do the work they can on Perez, but it's going to sacrifice Max. And then they realize, second practice session, we can't do that. Like, by second practice, we have to now just focus on Max.
Yeah. And this is, I think, where they've started to realize that, okay, Max can, in theory, run away with the championship like he did last year. But if he doesn't, and it's looking like he's not going to this year, it's unacceptable for Perez to be so far back. And they need to give him a car where he can be competitive. So now it looks like they're in that tuning loop to try and see what can we do to get both of these drivers reasonably confident in this car.
I don't know. I could say, well, if you don't feel comfortable with Perez, why'd you re-sign him so early? If you're
it's
not,
not that I don't
go on.
I don't think they're not feeling comfortable with him. I think they want him there and they know that he can do something, but they have to give him a car that he's comfortable in. And unfortunately, that means it's a car that Max isn't.
That's what I'm saying. And you and I have talked about it before.
Yeah,
go on.
But I think where it comes into it this year is that they don't have a car, period, that Max is comfortable with. They went a direction with that car that was different this year. And I think it took it away from Max. And this is, again, a fundamental design problem where it's like Mercedes ran into. You can't just change it weekend to weekend. So I think they've realized, well, shit, okay. Max isn't going to be able to run away with it because the car has gone away from him on a fundamental level. So now we have to make it as comfortable for both drivers because we don't have the benefit of Max.
To do that right, and that's a good point, to do that right into a triple header could make for 3 really bad races for Red Bull then.
Well, I think they've been doing it for the last 3 or 4 races. I don't think this is a new thing for them.
But didn't they bring some upgrades this weekend?
I'm sure they did. I didn't catch what they were, but again, if it's a fundamental design problem, it's not something that upgrades will get you.
Okay. That's interesting.
I might be wrong.
No, I think you're onto
But
something. I
that's
think you
just
are onto
what I
something.
got to thinking.
You're definitely onto something. And that's maybe
The really fun part.
Go on.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. I don't really have much to say. Go on. The really fun part.
Guess who was in fourth place?
Oh, I did see that actually. Gasly.
Yes.
So the Formula One basically brushed it off and said, okay, you can't judge the weekend's progress on practice because, look, the Alpine is here. But you have a different take, it sounds like.
I mean, I don't think they're going to be there. Look at what we saw from Yuki a few races ago, right? Same sort of thing. But it does show that it's not all hopeless for Alpine, which goes back to your prediction at the beginning of the season that they won't finish on the bottom because Pierre was 4 and Ocon was 9. So yeah, it's a big offset between the two of them, but they're both finishing in points-paying positions. At least in practice, there's no points, but you get what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas earlier in the season, both those guys would have been 15th, 16th, 14th.
If they were lucky.
Yeah. And now, they genuinely seem to be on pace. Like, he's 5/100ths off of Lewis Hamilton.
Wow.
Sorry, that's wrong. No, he's almost 2/10ths off. I was looking at the wrong one.
Still, they're celebrating. At no point were they ever 2/10ths off Mercedes. Yeah.
And Max was almost a 10th off of Gasly.
Wow. But we've talked about it before too. Red Bull focuses on how they want to do long runs in practice. They're thinking steps ahead.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say that this is what we're going to see, but it is interesting. It is interesting.
Yes.
Let's get into our top fives. So based on all that, you say there's a fundamental problem with Red Bull, maybe a big problem, may not be a big problem. This time we'll start from 5. Who do you think finishes 5th this weekend?
I'm going to say Sergio.
Okay. I was thinking him in the top 5 this weekend too. Because I think he needs a good race. He definitely needs a good race. And last year he did pretty good here. I think he was 4th, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to look that up as I'm talking. 5, though, I'm going to go Russell this time. By the way, are you writing this down, or we'll try and remember?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
I've got it.
I'm going to go Russell. I missed the Mercedes last weekend in Canada. I'm going to give them another chance to do good. From what you're saying, they're doing pretty good in practice. Yes, they've deceived us in practice before, but I'm going to give Russell a top 5 finish.
Okay.
4th, I'm going to go with Piastri. Pardon me?
Nope, you answered it.
Okay. Piastri. That seems to be his most common spot, and I think you're saying the McLaren looked pretty good. McLaren, I think, is going to be good every weekend from this point forward. I think they're on good form. They're on good momentum. I think we're going to see at least both of them in the top 5, if not the top 6 to 8 every weekend. I think the only reason we don't see them in the top 5 every weekend is Piastri gets a little unlucky.
Yeah. I would agree with that, and I'm also going to put Piastri there.
It's his most common spot, unfortunately.
Hey. Podium.
Podium. I just want to add, Perez did finish 4th last year. I'm just looking it up now. Podium, this is tough. I'm going to do it, though. I'm going to put Perez 3rd. He's due.
Okay.
Who you got for third?
I'm going to put Sainz.
It's bold.
I would love to see him win, but I don't think he's going to.
Yeah, you're not going to see a Fernando or Carlos top step podium this year as much as you like to see the Spaniards in their home race. Sainz fifth last year. I'm just looking at the last year's classification. Charles Leclerc 11th. Interestingly enough, yeah. So I hope Charles Leclerc isn't your number 2 spot.
No.
Who you got?
My number 2 is going to be Max.
I like that. I do. I'm going to go opposite of you, though. I think Lando comes second again.
Okay.
Because I think I know who you got number 1.
Who do I have number 1?
Is it Lando?
It is not. It does start with an L, though.
No. You're going to go there? I like that.
I'm going to go with Lewis, yes.
For the first time in almost 3 years. 2.5. Because, yeah, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix was November. It's more than 2.5 years. Wow.
Yeah.
He is due.
Good.
Sorry.
No, he looked good. He looked happy. He seemed to like what he was feeling. And we saw what happened in Canada, where he did really well, despite him saying it's one of his worst performances. He did really well. But Canada can be a tricky track. I think on a proper track like Spain, it is a proper racetrack. Lots of nice corners. He loves that place. He's won more there than anybody else in F1 history. I think that's where, if he's feeling comfortable in the car, that's probably his best bet all year.
Yeah. I would actually, I'll spoil this surprise now. I was going to say if things start going in the right direction for for Mercedes, that Silverstone was going to be his win. It's the feel-good story of the year, but yeah, I guess you're right. If he is the most winning driver on this track, why not?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are a few tracks where he's the most winning driver there just because his career's been so long and so dominant.
A lot of them, though, are like new ones. A lot of new ones here. It's not necessarily the oldest ones. Like, I don't think he's the most winning in Brazil, is he?
He's close to, I think. But you're not wrong. There are tracks that would have come on the calendar early enough in his career where he was really dominant and then stayed there, right? So.
Yeah, like I think he has close to the same amount of wins as Vettel at Singapore. Vettel was legitimately dominant at Singapore. I think Lewis just won because, like you said, he was at the top. He was at the top in his prime.
Yeah.
Number 1 to me is Max. I'm going to give him another chance. And number 1. I think he still finds a way. He's won this track now 2 years in a row. Potentially 3.
It was the track he first won at.
So let's see. Let's see if we're right.
All right.
I didn't put either Ferraris in the top 5, and you didn't put Lando Norris in your top 5.
I didn't, and there's a reason for that.
Go on.
We'll get to it when we get to the other predictions.
When we do a recap?
No.
Oh.
When we get to our wild card predictions.
Okay. Oh, that's right. Duh. Okay, so P10. You know what? I'm gonna go Ocon again. I'm gonna say the Alpines have done me well in this P10 prediction. So yeah. Who's your P10?
Let's see. I'm gonna go with Stroll. Why not?
I've had bad luck. I've had bad luck betting on those horses. Okay.
That's why I'm aiming low.
What's your wild card?
I mean, they should.
Sorry, go on. That you think they should?
They should go well here. Like, this is not a difficult track per se, and there's nothing about it that tells me Aston Martin should struggle. So P10 is aiming low, frankly. If they're under P10, then I think they need to burn that building to the ground.
You and I have been sounding the Aston Martin alarm since before the season. And the BBC and Sky Sports have finally caught up to us. And because as of late, I'm hearing more and more of them talking about how Aston Martin needs to make sure Racing Bulls doesn't catch them. It is now.
I think it's too late for that.
I agree with you. You did pick the Racing Bulls, I think, 4th or 5th in your preseason predictions. I think you're going to be rewarded handsomely for that. Because Yuki's on it, and I think Danny will join the party eventually, and doesn't look like there's no end in sight for Aston Martin.
Yeah.
We'll see after this weekend, because you're right. They should, but will they? All right. Sorry I keep interrupting you. I think there's a bit of a delay. So that's why. Who's your outlier?
My outlier is that Lando does not finish.
Wow. Bold. Explain.
And frankly, I think that's the only way my top 5 makes sense.
Agreed. Yeah, he's not coming 6th. That's for Charles Leclerc, who I'm actually going to call it right now. Charles Leclerc finishes 7th.
Is that your wild card, or are you just saying that?
No, I'm just saying that. My wild card, looking at the classification, Zhou Guanyu was 9th here last year. I'm going to say Valtteri Bottas is in the top 10 this year. I think Sauber gets it right. One race. It's bold, and it can easily go wrong, and it goes against my prediction of like circa 2 weeks ago that they won't score a point the rest of the season, but I'm going to give them a chance.
All right.
Do you want to elaborate as to why you think Lando won't finish? Or is it just a bold prediction?
I think he will probably qualify well. And in his, I don't even know what to call it, just Lando being Lando, will do something to destroy his opportunity. We've seen it a couple of times. First lap, turn 2, 3, 4, that sequence tends to screw with people. I mean, we saw Grosjean do some stupid things there a few years back. But it's not uncommon for turn 1 in Barcelona to be relatively uneventful, to promptly then have 2 or 3 separate incidents in 2, 3, and 4. So I think that might be where Lando doesn't finish. I think he's the casualty of an opening lap Landoism.
I'm excited for this race. That's a very good point you bring.
Let's hope it lives up to that.
It's usually especially the last couple of years, it's usually pretty straightforward in terms of like the informed team is the one that wins. But I don't know. We'll see. It's different year, different setup, like different types of competition going on. So we'll see.
Yep.
All right. I think we should wrap it up unless you have something else you want to add.
No, I think that's good for me.
Thanks for talking me off the ledge this episode. I appreciate that. It's always good to be hopeful.
I don't know if that's true, but
I wish I was competent enough to have that song line up by Third Eye Blind. Wish you would step back from that ledge, my friend.
you could always just kind of cut and paste it in there.
I could. I won't. I might. All right. Let us know how we think we did.
All right.
F1 Philosophy at YouTube, F1_Philosophy at Instagram, and F1PhilosophyPod at gmail.com to join our fantasy league. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Say goodbye, Sean.
Good night.